Every January, we see a bump in health and wellness cookbooks. But this year, it seems that these books may be part of an even wider trend toward bringing mindfulness and greater meaning to our cooking. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Molly Stevens, and I am here today with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Molly.
So we've talked a little bit about this trend or the bump in mindfulness, cooking with intention.
Yeah.
You shared an article.
Yeah. Jamie Feldmar wrote an article in December in Saveur about books that talk about mindfulness in the kitchen. And, we've seen it with Samin Nosrat's latest, Tamar Adler's latest, Nigel Slater. And we see that with the book from our guest today.
Right. And I thought the article, and we'll put a link to it, was really interesting because Jamie concludes saying, for generations, cookbook authors have urged us to slow down. And I know, like in my last book I wrote, I think it was part of the introduction, it ends and says, relax, it's just dinner.
Mm-hmm.
To write a whole book with that overriding theme, that's, I feel like, is a little different.
For sure. And I wonder if it speaks to the exhaustion and burnout people feel in general, and then that's carried over to the kitchen.
Right.
To deal with the exhaustion and burnout, a lot of people have embraced things like mindfulness or community. I feel like that's another one where it's like community as well-being. And Samin has talked about that in her latest book. But just, this overall merging of like the physical and emotional, mental, spiritual, and how that can come into cooking makes a lot of sense to me and why it's right for this moment.
Right. Today's guest, Nicki Sizemore, I've known her for a number of years. We worked together at Fine Cooking, and she, for a long time, had a very successful blog, Fast from Scratch. It's so interesting because so much of like early blogging and a lot of books, like how to do it quickly, how to like minimize the time, get in, get out, feed your family. And the shift to doing a book about intentional cooking is so interesting. You have a young daughter, you have a full-time job in addition to this podcast. You must feel it at home.
Oh, yeah. I'm always like, where am I going to fit in dinner? Thankfully, I work from home. So,
right.
Yeah, but every day it's a little bit of a panic. Nicki's book is really trying to get people who want to get out of that to help them with that. This in her work, this is what she's putting out is like, let's all slow down. But it is coming from a personal place. And even with her business, not just the fact that the message she was saying fast from scratch, but also what it was sort of doing behind the scenes of like writing a blog where your main goal is to bring people from search, how that like can bring you sort of away from yourself because you're writing these recipes for SEO success and how that can impact burnout. Basically, I'm wondering if this will be really inspiring for some of our listeners who might have or continue to produce blogs where a lot of their traffic is SEO and maybe they're looking to like do something that's a little more interesting to them personally.
Yeah. Even think of myself, never had a blog, but the amount of recipes I developed for magazine, that was very external. Like, what did they need? What did what was my editor looking for? What were the parameters? And, you get very good at it, but it does start to like do this weird disassociation with your own cooking.
Yeah, your own taste in a sense.
Yeah, I know with my last book, All About Dinner, that was what I was really trying to do was like reclaim writing about the food that I wanted to cook at home. It's a really interesting topic, but I think for our listeners, the burnout piece is very real, but how do you put it into a book? Nicki's a trained chef, a recipe developer, educator, cookbook author, blogger. She hosts a podcast. She's written 3 other cookbooks, and Mind, Body, Spirit, Food just came out in January. So let's bring her on. Nicki, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
I am so delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me on.
Congrats on the new book.
Thank you.
When we first started talking to you about coming on, you emailed and said, my approach to writing this book was profoundly different from my previous ones. It often felt like the book was writing me. The process, which unfolded over 4 years, truly changed my life. Tell us about that.
Well, okay, so we've got to like rewind back to 2019. I had published 3 cookbooks. I was a blogger. I had built this blog called From Scratch Fast, and it had become my business at that point. So I was like, teaching people how to get dinner on the table fast. And then at home, the reality was that I was struggling massively. I had 2 young kids, like 5 and 10. And I had developed chronic indigestion. I was on medication every single day. And the dinner hour, which had always been my favorite time of day, really like my creative outlet. Cooking is also my work, but my creative outlet had become this moment of such stress in my life. And there was one night after just like another stressful night of trying to get dinner on my table and rushing, and the kids are asking things of me. And I felt like I was failing at this thing that I was supposed to be able to do pretty well at this point. And I'm just like, what is going on? Why does this feel so stressful? And like, I'm so done with feeling so uncomfortable in my body, which is the indigestion aspect. And I was just like, I have to change. Like, there has to be some way that I can make a shift here. I had to kind of hit that bottom rung of cooking being stressful, feeding myself being stressful. I was disconnected from my body. I was disconnected from the pleasure and the creativity that goes into cooking. I had built this blog and it was doing everything I wanted it to do. And yet I lost my voice. I was writing for Google. At that point, the blogging world had shifted. I think the blogging world started as a place of real expression. And the food blogging world became so saturated, it really became about writing for search engines like SEO.
When you say writing for Google, you mean writing for SEO.
Exactly. And so I was like, in even the recipes that I was developing, I wouldn't choose things that I really wanted to do because they didn't have any, what you call it, like they didn't have any legs. Google wouldn't care, So you're like writing copy that's very simple, that Google's going to like, choosing recipes that you think people will find. And I just completely lost myself. So that moment started to shift things. And what's interesting is like we think about these big shifts in our life and like, oh, it's this major overhaul. And I'm telling you, it started so simply. It started so stupidly simply, yet it had a major impact. And that was for me just to stop before jumping into cooking, because I would get home with the kids. Everything was racing around and I like would enter that cooking process like I was on deadline, carrying with me all of the stuff of the day and the to-dos that were yet to come. And I just created a tiny little pause to take 2 deep breaths before I started cooking. And it was just that. So easy, so simple. And the more I started to do that, the bigger kind of mental pause I was able to gain in this process. And all of a sudden, the cooking process started to shift microscopically. And these practices that I share in the book of like engaging our senses and setting an intention, that started to come slowly, that like kind of percolated up. It wasn't this whole big download of like, now I'm going to do this thing. It happened really slowly. And over time, completely shifted my relationship to cooking and I would say my relationship to my body, to the point where I was able to get off of heartburn medication altogether. And I was able to reclaim this time of day, like dinner hour and the other meals of the day too, as a time of, this word is not my favorite word, but is a time of self-care. Like it became a time for me, not a time to, I got to feed my family. I got to perform this thing. I got to do this thing for work. Cooking had kind of become that, this performance or this outcome-driven enterprise. And instead, it became a process for me to tune in, to get curious, to get creative, and to really access pleasure, which is something I had never really given myself, like never given pleasure to thoughts, really. I was like, pleasure just comes to us, right? We get pleasure from like going on vacation. And all of a sudden it was like, no, I can find beauty and pleasure in like the simplest things. And the kitchen was the place where I started.
So how did that then turn into a book?
So this all started in 2019. I was just like, I'm going to do this for myself. After I wrote my last book, it was Fresh Flavors for the Slow Cooker. I was like, I'm done with books. Okay, I did this thing.
Because that came out in 2019.
That came out. And then I was like, and I'm like, I'm done. I did it. I wrote 3 books or whatever. So I never really thought it was going to be a book until I started to develop recipes sometime in 2021, probably. I was like, you know what? I like this. These practices are kind of leading me somewhere. I like this idea of creating recipes where there's variation, where people can choose, like they can tap in and choose. I started writing recipes. I still didn't really think it was a book, though, to be honest. I was like, this is going to go somewhere, but I'm not sure. And then it was at one point talking to a good friend of mine. She was like, I think people would find this really helpful. And I was like, oh, really? Like, this isn't just my own little situation.
And this being you're stopping, taking a moment, cooking with more intention.
Yeah. And so it was then that I was like, oh, I do think this could be a book. And I do think this could be unlike the other books I wrote, which were so topic driven.
Right.
So I was like, okay, let me start tinkering. Let me start playing around. I just had this document on my computer where I just started kind of writing. And what's weird is that in writing that, I found my voice again. During this time in 2022, I became really sick. I burnt out, and really it was like no one understood what was going on. And I was like,
were you still doing your blog? Were you keeping up with that?
Yeah, this was still blog times. I had started writing this document, like maybe this is going to turn into something, and then totally burned out. And I realized the blog was the thing. Like, I had to stop this monster. It wasn't my path anymore. And so I took a whole summer off. It was the first time I've ever taken that much time off of work. And when you have a blog, a lot of it is, income that's coming in just on its own, which I'm really grateful for. And at the end of that summer, that's when I had this idea of starting my Substack newsletter. And that led to the newsletter and podcast launching later that year. So the book started before my newsletter even launched in 2023. And now they both have the same name, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. But that was like, it was all so unexpected. And that burnout moment happened writing the book, but it wasn't until really the summer of 2022. I was like, okay, I'm going to do a proposal. I think there's a book here.
Yeah. So what happens? You go to Story, your publisher, that you've written these two, topics, the Slow Cooker book and Build a Bowl.
Yeah.
So you show up with a very different proposal.
I didn't go to them. So I actually, for this book, I was like, I want an agent for this book. I didn't have an agent for my last 2 books. I had a lawyer help me with the contracts, but I didn't have anybody negotiating or advocating for me. And I really wanted an agent for this book because it's like, I didn't know if it was going to be easy to sell. Mm-hmm. So I reached out in the fall of 22, I think, to 9 agents. I had a dream agent in mind. Maybe 4 of them I didn't hear back from. I heard back from a couple of them. I heard back nice things, like really positive things, actually. And they were all like, and this is, it was kind of weird. It was like mindfulness in the kitchen now we're seeing it.
I was going to say, especially then, because it's actually coming out at this perfect time where I feel like there is a larger trend. But yeah, I could see even a couple of years ago it being like, this is strange.
This is strange. Like, what's the angle? We don't really understand it. And then Judy Linden, who was my dream agent just because of the book she's represented in the past, she wrote back to me. She's like, I really am interested in this. I'm really busy. Can I look at it in early 2023 and get back to you? I was like, okay, sure. Meanwhile, that took a little while, but eventually she got it. She was like the first one to get it. She's like, yeah, there's legs here. Let's do it.
And in that time, you're also building your newsletter and your podcast too. So you're building this brand around what ultimately becomes this book.
Yeah. I couldn't have predicted that. None of this was orchestrated consciously, just happened. And then when Judy came on, signed on, we started with Story and ended up sticking. We didn't even pitch the book elsewhere. I just felt like the team at Story really was excited. They got behind it. And again, we're still in this time where like mindfulness in cooking is kind of weird. It's kind of straddling the wellness group and the cooking group, and they really got it. And they've been such great. Its story has just been so great to work with in my past 2 books, and just kind of gives me free reign, and I really love that. So we stuck with them, and it's been amazing. And the interesting thing, though, by the time I finalized the contract with Story, the book was 75% of the way done.
Wow.
So it was like, it just has been this like slow, steady build. And the book itself has been done since fall of 2024. And then in 2025, in the spring, that's when we really finalized things. We got the cover figured out, which took a lot of time. We got the title, which I never thought would have been Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. I thought it was going to be intentional cooking or cooking with intention, but we ended up on Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. It's just been kind of like sitting,
Waiting for its moment.
Yeah, I think it was originally, the publisher was going to originally publish it in the fall of 2025. And thankfully, Judy had the insight to be like, fall isn't the right time for this book.
It's crowded.
It's a crowded time. And this book, it is kind of about self-connection. I mean, it is about self-connection. And there is some wellness elements to it. I don't call it a wellness book, but I do think January is a much better time.
Yeah. And you mentioned the variation. So that is a really innovative part of this book. I mean, it's not just the intentions, but incorporating variations into the actual recipe. It's a very cool structure. It sounds like that also was part of this pretty early.
It was. My work is always to empower people to find freedom around food, which really feels like it's a very lofty thing to say, but it's really to empower them to be able to tune in to what they want to cook in. What all of us are so individual and so unique. Like, help people tune into what feels good in their bodies, but then also to empower them as cooks. At the end of the day, like, I love teaching practical cooking skills. So by offering variation, I was like, there's 2 elements to that. It's allowing people to choose. Choice is power. What feels good, what sounds good to you. And then also, I don't know about you, but I get so stuck in a rut with a recipe. Like, I will, in the weeknight cooking recipes, I'll make the same thing over and over and over and over again. And then it's like, oh, wait, if I could just open that up and realize I could swap out a few things here and there and use this technique and create something that feels entirely different, then that kind of breaks down that narrow tunnel vision that I had and opens me up to more possibility. And then I hope people will take that and run with it on their own so they can make the variations in the book and then maybe learn that technique to use it on their own in whatever way feels good to them.
Yeah, it's a really unique, as Kristin said, like, for anyone who hasn't seen the book yet, every recipe except for the improv chapter.
Yeah.
But out of the 7 chapters, 6 of them, every single recipe has 2 versions built into the recipe.
Yeah.
Which builds this looseness into the book. And I was just noticing, we were talking about the book before we got on, like, you don't spend time in the head note explaining the 2 versions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pedantic at all. You're not like, okay, you could make the blueberry lime one, or you could make the pistachio lemon one, and here's what you're going to get. You just sort of invite us to dive in and figure out. And sometimes the versions are flavor, but other times they're ingredient driven, like protein. There's vegetarian versus meat-based dishes, but it's more work as a recipe developer for sure.
God. Yeah, this is so much work. Yeah, which was nice that I had started tinkering with these recipes and they just became like built into the fabric of my family. I could really take my time with them because, as you said, like, everything, it wasn't just testing one recipe. It was testing multiple recipes multiple times. But the nice thing about that stretch is I never felt that pressure because I didn't know it was going to be booked, right. And then it was a book.
Hadn't even sold it yet.
I hadn't even sold it yet. I just wanted to create recipes that, my family and I wanted to eat. And that was such, like, the most joyous part about this book is I got to take my time.
Yeah. I want to make sure people understand what's really cool about this is that, because we see recipes all the time that will have, like, you can swap the cumin for coriander or whatever at the beginning, but this is like embedded in the recipe. It's very choose your own adventure.
It tells us choose your version.
So it's like, are we doing a black bean version or are we doing the ground meat version? Which one? And then that has its own recipe list. But the design is very well done in that it's really easy. Like we talk about user experience a lot, and the user experience of this book is great in terms of you know where to go. A lot fits on one page.
Yeah, I was so grateful for the design team because they did a great job. Because when as you can imagine it, like when I submitted this, it's all in a Word doc and I've got some things in bold and some things in italics and trying to make it. And I was like, I know that there's a way we're going to make this really clear. And we went through a few iterations, but I think it ended up being just how I wanted it. Like every recipe is on a 2-page spread.
It's amazing.
So that it's all there. Yeah. And then what's cool, I mean, this is where story really got it because each recipe is actually 4 pages because the first 2 pages, one is an intention, this suggestion of something you can kind of focus your mind on as you cook this recipe, just a suggestion. And then there's a photo of both variations. And then you turn the page and then it's the full recipe spread. So it took a lot of actually intention to design it in a way that felt easy, but that also gave it space. I didn't want it to feel super cluttered.
Yeah.
The word we came up with thinking about the design is it's calm. It's a very calming thing. And I love what you say, Kristin, about you know where to go. Nicki, you and I used to do a lot with fine cooking, right? Yeah. And we used to try to do this sort of build your own. And they were charts and they were jam full. And I mean, I loved them. I loved working on those. But it's a very different experience. And I think the intention was the same, trying to empower people to make things their own. But the design element here, just how much space the team, the publisher, you all decided to give this is kind of remarkable.
I guess I want to go back to the this book wrote me idea.
Yeah. For this book, it wasn't like, okay, I have this idea. I'm going to bring mindfulness into cooking and I'm going to write this book. It couldn't have happened that way. It was like the practices were changing my life. And then I started to write things down eventually in a document, but I was still in it. I hadn't mastered it when I started to write this book. I don't think mastery is even something we do with a practice like cooking, right? We're constantly in relationship with it. But it hadn't crystallized yet. So I was writing the book while healing, while reclaiming this sense of creativity and pleasure. And in a way, it felt like it was writing me because I had to go through that process with it. It wasn't just downloaded. It wasn't a topic that was suggested to me. It kind of came through slowly but surely. And I don't think it was any mistake that it took this much time because I had to edit the hell out of it. It was a lot of iterations. At first, it was so much. It was there would have been no space like we have now in the design because I just wanted to explain everything. I wanted to get it all there. And then as I started to refine, I had this sense that simplicity was better. I had this sense that people can figure this out for themselves, that I don't have to explain every single thing. And so that took a lot of sloughing off of excess, I would say. By the time that the book is out now, these practices are so embedded in my life. It's no longer something I have to think about. I definitely get caught up in patterns of urgency. I definitely have nights that are still stressful. And it's just now so easy to be like, oh, wait, let's take a breath. Let's pause. How do I want this to feel right now? It doesn't feel like something I'm trying to do. It just feels like it's so part of me. And I think that's important when you put a book into the world, that it's not just something I'm talking about, but it's something that feels cellular. That makes sense.
Yeah. When you talk about the process of editing and sloughing off, and I'm sort of assuming that some of the cooking notes might have come from some of the other information that you decided to take out because you, as a teacher, you couldn't help but put some of that in there. So sort of
exactly
finding the ones that were the most important, essential, put them in there. But I'm also curious about, the 50 recipes is not a ton, although one would argue it's closer to 100 or 150 by the time you use all these versions. I do want to next ask a little about chapter organization, but choosing the recipes, because really, could it have been any recipe? I mean, how do you choose the recipes to represent, to teach, to bring people along into this?
Okay, I love this question because I actually love organization and writing. The organization part of cookbooks is really fun.
Yeah, you're in a safe place here.
Yeah. So it started just like, okay, I'm going to play in the kitchen. Like I said, I was at this point where blogging, I'd been burning out as a blogger. I had been lost that creative spark of creating recipes that really brought me joy. So I just started there and I was just like creating stuff, on a whim that felt fun. And eventually when I realized, oh, wait, this isn't just going to be like in a newsletter or something. This is going to be a book. When I put everything in a spreadsheet, which is so fun to do. And that's when I started to really think about where does everything go? So I had a whole pile of recipes just for the fun of creating recipes. And then I had to start thinking about, what do I have? What's needed? What is missing? And how can these things pair together? And so that's when the structure of the book came about. And that's really when I decided that I was going to write a book again. Like this was like, okay, let's do this. Let's create the structure where all of this is going to live in a way that makes sense.
Cool. I love a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's definitely my favorite part.
Well, it's so fun because that was the first time that I could see it as a book, because it was all in one place. That visual cue of seeing all the recipes written, and then you're just kind of like moving things around and like, what chapter would this be in, and what chapter would that be in? It becomes this holistic experience instead of this disjointed, like, I'm just going to create because creating is fun situation. So
your decision to give these chapters, I guess, mindful titles is, I don't know, awaken, soothe, innovate, transform, with a subtitle that'll say soups and stews, salads and bowls or whatever. But I'm curious about that decision. And then also the chapter openers. This is kind of back to design, but they're all in shapes of food, like a strawberry or a lemon. And then there's a photo on the opposing page is that. So it took me a moment, like the mushroom one. That's when I finally got it. I was like, oh, they're in the shape of the food. But it sort of was this exploratory process as a user, as Kristin says.
Yeah. This is thanks to my editor, Sarah Slattery at Story, who had this idea, and Deanna Cook, who was the acquisitions editor. I actually think it was Deanna's idea to come up with chapter titles, because I was having a really hard time with chapter titles. Here I'm writing this book that it's different, and just like breakfast and starters. And then, there was an opportunity for a little bit more poetry, I think. So she had that great idea of like, this book is all about intention, how you want to feel when you're cooking. Like, how about we start with that? Like, how do we want these chapters to really make you feel? So the Awaken chapter is all about, it's about breakfast, but also snacks and starters. Like, how do we awaken our palate? And there's a ground chapter. And so each also then that led me to write a chapter opener. And it's like, what does it mean to be grounded? What does it mean? How do vegetables help us get there? And there's an improvised chapter, as you mentioned, and that's kind of like these recipes that are loose and you can use whatever's in your fridge, and let's play and let's dance in the kitchen and get out of this strict having to measure teaspoon by teaspoon, but rather use our intuition a bit more. So I'm really grateful for the team, because really that decision was sparked by my editor.
That's cool. Yeah. And like the ground chapter opener, it's like in the shape of a radish or some kind of little root, like, it's so clever. Just like so much calming space around a lot of that copy. Really well done. I'm curious too, because there's a photo for every recipe, every variation, right?
Yeah.
How did the photo shoot work?
Yeah. So my last two books with Story, they hired the photographer, and I had a say, but they hired the photographer. And even though the last two shoots were at my house, they had somebody from their team here. This was the first book where I was totally in charge of the photography and the photo shoot. I feel like everything in this book just kind of like happened in a really like organic way, because there is a woman, Ricky Snyder. I'm in the Hudson Valley of New York, and there's a woman I follow on Instagram and who follows me, who's a photographer. And I really like her work, but I didn't know if she did a lot of food photography. And I reached out and I was like, hey, I'm doing this book. And she was so enthusiastic. And she actually does a ton of food photography and works with Leslie Orlandini, who's a food stylist. And she's like, yeah, I could not have asked for a better team. There were 3 of us. It was Ricky, Leslie, and Kirsty Bowser at my house. This is another really beautiful way that we structured the photo shoot. And it just kind of happened this way, but I think I would do this for future books, is that we did 1 week in June, and then we did another week in September. Because as you guys know, a cookbook photo shoot where you're photographing every single recipe in the book is a massive amount of output. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, the food stylist, I mean, Leslie is so on it. I barely had to do anything except for on set, tinker with things. Like, she was amazing. But it takes over your house if you do it at your house. And I've got kids and a family. So by breaking it up, it was really cool because the first one happened. It was great. By the time the second one happened, we were so excited to be back in the kitchen together. It built that like, oh, I can't wait. And then it was fall. And so different things are available. We got some outdoor shots. We didn't use a ton in the book, but we did like try to capitalize on the seasons, and some in my garden in June and some in fall. And so that felt like a really deep sigh. Again, we had the time. We had this, we had the time for it. So to be able to split it up was just great.
Nice. And then it's nice to be able to, I know it takes over your house, but then you're also saving on like a studio fee basically when you get to shoot at home.
Right.
Yeah.
And you feature in the photos too. Mm-hmm. There are quite a few pictures of not just your body parts, as we like to say, but you and you're, smiling, cooking in the photos as well.
I actually wanted to limit that. So I didn't want there to be too many photos of me. There are like hand photos and stuff, and there's a handful of me, but I didn't want this to be, I am not an influencer. I didn't want this to be a book about me. I really want this to be a book people can see themselves in. And so we were pretty strategic about where we placed photos of me, or kind of like in the background, or it's just joy. Like I hope that people find that for themselves.
Yeah. And you're not on the cover. I mean, it is a balance. I want to get onto promotion and things, but I'm really curious about the intentions or the meditations and the writing of these, because every recipe has one. They're brief. Like anybody who's done this kind of work knows what reading an intention is like. But I'm sort of wondering the process of like, they had to take a lot of time. I mean, there's a lot of them and they're all different and they each have a title. I mean, I found I could dip into it and read the intentions without planning to cook the recipe, or cook the recipe without planning to read the intention. And so what was the process of writing them? And then how did you decide where they go?
Yes. The intentions were the juice, like for me, in writing the book, and probably the most satisfying thing about the, I can't say the most satisfying thing because I really love developing recipes and all of that. But the intention, as I describe in the book, an intention is just a word or phrase to guide how we want to feel. So often we jump into a cookbook or into a recipe and we're focused on the outcome. We want to create this dish as it's pictured in the book. We want to have this beautiful outcome. And the whole point of the book is I think we're looking at it the wrong way. I think we need to start with the process. In now living this for so many years, that is where the joy is. It's like when we can let go of the outcome and focus how we want the cooking process to feel, that's when we open the door to so much more satisfaction. And then the outcome loses, we start to disconnect from perfectionism and all those things that come with this goal-driven, outcome-driven sensibility when it comes to cooking. We can enjoy the process. And I will argue that makes us better cooks because we're more engaged and more present. So what I decided to do was include an intention, a suggested intention for each recipe, and you can take it or leave it. You can approach this book as just like a cookbook. Or you can approach this book with some of these practices in mind to start to change our behavior or our perception of what cooking is. So the intentions are just a little description. Some of them, I will open to beauty. I will be present in this moment. There's a ton, and I invite people to create their own. but I couldn't force these things. That was very interesting. They really came about as I was making the recipes, and they were tied to the recipes. So I don't think there's a single recipe where I was like, here's this intention, I'm going to put it here. It didn't work like that. It had to happen as I was cooking. That intention would just surface somewhere and be like, okay. Some of them just like flowed out pretty easily. And some of them I had the intention and I didn't understand how it could connect to the recipe. I was like, wait, like some of them, I will embrace contrasts, right? Like we all live in this world where we're met with so much duality. How do we embrace that? And that's like very easy. It comes with a tart recipe where there's a chocolate cashew filling or a cream cheese creamy filling. Very obvious. But then some of the others were like, I don't know why this feels like the intention that needs to go here. So I need to cook this recipe a few times and let's see what happens. And eventually it would make sense.
So for example, I will seek the positive, and it is before a creamy kale salad. And it's talking about, we perceive bitterness perhaps as negative, and yet the beauty or the value of bitter vegetables in terms of their nutrient density. And it's really lovely, beautifully done.
Nicki, what you said about focusing on the outcome, just a lot clicked for me. And there's not an absence of head notes, but the head notes are not like describing the dish and telling us what we're after. You've eliminated that. And I was curious when I was reading, I was like, where's that gone? Because I've read your blog. I mean, I know you're capable and you often do that in your other work. And hearing you talk, it's so interesting. But one thing you do occasionally in the book, and not every recipe, is you'll end the recipe with a little, I think it was the bulgogi, you say, you're stronger than you think. Mm-hmm. At the end of the recipe. It's just sort of like thrown in there. Or occasionally there was a soup that you say, slurp with love, or what a revelation on a sushi bake. And so, but that's just pops up here and there, but you haven't like ended every recipe with that.
Right. I didn't. It had to end. So what you're talking about are those tie back to the intentions for the recipe. What I didn't want this book to do was get cheesy, right? And so I included those where it felt like, this is what I would say to you right now if I was handing you this bowl. And I didn't want to say it just for the sake of like, oh God, it just feels like really cheesy all of a sudden.
Or contrived somehow.
Or contrived, exactly. Yeah. That's the word.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it feels like kind of organic. You're right, Molly. It's not every single recipe.
Right.
So I think we should talk about promotion. We talked about it being a January book.
Yeah.
Who do you see as your audience and how are you going to try to reach them?
Yeah. I have a podcast and a newsletter, as you know, and I also do one-on-one sessions. In the sessions, they're just an opportunity for people to bring a block they have around cooking or food and to explore that together. I feel like the book is for a few different audiences. It's for those people who are like, in some way have struggled with food or with cooking in the past and really want to find joy in this thing that we have to do every single day of feeding ourselves. Because ultimately what the practice is in this book, that's what it brought me. This real sense of freedom and real sense of connection. I think there is an audience for that. And then I see a different audience as well, though I would say that mostly women. The age ranges for that audience, I would say starting in their early 30s. So young women who don't have families, and then mothers with kids trying to navigate, how do I feed myself while having to feed all these other people? But then there's also this other demographic of women who are older, more like my mom's age, who or newly retired, who maybe have had this relationship with cooking in the past of having to feed a family. And now they're at this place where they have time and they want to approach the cooking process differently. It's always been something they had to do. And so how do you switch that into something, wait, I can do this and I can actually do this for myself. And I can do this in a way that brings me joy instead of constantly putting my focus outward as to who I'm feeding and what I'm doing. So I see both of those audiences within the scope of my work. And then there's also an audience that's gluten-free. So every recipe in this book, I can't eat gluten and neither can my two kids. So every recipe in this book is naturally gluten-free. You wouldn't really know it. I mean, in fact, with all of my recipes, I kind of wanted to sneak up on people because it's not the forefront of what I do. I want the recipes to stand on their own, whether or not you can eat gluten. But I definitely have an audience that has been following me for some time because they're gluten-free and they know that whatever recipes come out of my kitchen will be safe for them and their family.
Do you feel like you were able to bring blog readers pretty well along with you?
To Mind, Body, Spirit Food?
Yeah.
I would say no. I brought them over to Substack, and then there was a whole year of sloughing off, of like seeing people. And I really had to stick with it. I really had to be like, okay, all evidence is showing that maybe this isn't working.
Just because like unsubscribes or something.
Unsubscribes. And like, I wasn't seeing a growth, a steady growth. And I kept really in my gut being like, no, you got to give this time. And this is positive. Like this is going to be for the best. So it took a long time for that audience. Now the people who come to the work get it and they're coming. And now Substack is so different. I will say even starting a food Substack newsletter, there were not that many in January of 2023. Now it's like every single food writer has a Substack. So now the community in Substack is so much bigger. And there's the network in the platform itself where people find publications itself. Whereas before, my readers didn't understand what Substack was. They didn't know how to engage with it. I mean, a lot of them, I will be honest, like still don't. They read the newsletters, but they don't really engage with the platform. So it wasn't just like everyone bought into it. No, it took some time.
But now,
thankfully, there's just been really beautiful growth. And okay, Mind, Body, Spirit Food. The spirit thing can take people off. Like spirituality isn't a word that was even in my vocabulary until a few years ago. And it's a tricky word, right? It's this has nothing to do with religion. And really for me, spirituality is just connection to myself, connection to the world, connection to the earth, connection to other people. So it might have felt really strange for people, and it might still. And now that we're seeing this mindfulness in cooking, this desire to get away from digital age towards something analog, towards real connection, real creativity, I think people get it. I think people get it now.
Yeah.
Your story is such a testament to like the time, giving this time and sticking to that story of when you were losing your followers. It sounds, talking to you, Nicki, essential for you to stay in it. Like otherwise, I could see having come to this point where you were not well, you were struggling feeding, why am I writing recipes like this sort of, what am I doing? I'm telling people how to get food on the table quickly and I'm not happy doing it. The choice could have been to just be like, you know what, I'm going to write about something else. I'm going to stop developing recipes. That pivot to doing it in a way that is consistent with, how you're choosing to live is, it's a fascinating story.
I couldn't quite let it go. There's a point where I just wanted to burn it all down, to be totally honest. I was like, screw this. I'm over it. And I couldn't, because at the end of the day, the cooking and the recipes, it still is my creative outlet. I had to reclaim that for me. Like, what do I want? And trust that as much as like even, seeing the stats and Substack and be like, oh, am I supposed to be doing this? And then I'd get like one little message from somebody where something I wrote was like, this just changed me. And so these little sprinkles of being like, okay, just keep going. And I couldn't really stop. I'm so interested in it. When you're like so curious. And then the podcasts I've gotten to speak with people that I just like these deep conversations around food, yes, but also around like what it means to be in a body and what it means to live in a patriarchal society and like how this all ties back to food is bonkers, but it happens. And I think it's so fun.
And to cooking, it's not just food, but your lens is cooking. It really is. And your time in the kitchen. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine many people who have done blogging where they're creating recipes to feed some algorithm. Now it's like probably feeding like Google AI or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm sure they can relate
that was right for me at one time. You know what I mean? Like that was the right path for me at one time. Yeah. And then we all change, we all evolve. And how do we honor these different seasons that we enter? And it takes a lot of bravery to make that switch. And I hope next time I don't like have a massive burnout and get sick, right? Can I start to trust the creative path and start to trust, like, even when it seems really weird, that it's going to take me where I need to go. It takes a lot of courage. It's not always easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sort of brings us to a question we'd like to ask. It's advice you would have for anyone who is trying to write from a, sort of broader mindfulness space, but still connected to food and cooking and recipes and things that we're not always finding that in.
Yeah. I think you have to write about what feels meaningful. Like, what feels meaningful to you? And it might be mindfulness. It might be connection. It might be something totally different. But what is that little flame? What is that little fire, that little spark that brings you back to yourself? I would say a lot of what I talk about sounds awfully selfish. Like, we're talking about self-connection, cooking for pleasure for you. And what I will argue is that every time I've seen this in myself and in the people that I work with, is that when we do that for ourselves, that's when we make the biggest impact. That's when we can actually create work or create a life that influences and inspires other people. But it has to start with, like, what is it for you? What is that flame? What is that thing that you keep like coming back to and really wanting to explore or really wanting to dive into? And so it's not a clear answer because it's so individual, but I do think we all have to get a little bit selfish, but then we have to balance that a little bit with the practical side, because I just had Erin Goyoaga on she's going to be on my podcast this spring, but we had this long conversation about, like, we do this for a passion and it's a business. Like, this is my business too. And it gets kind of complicated sometimes because there are practical business decisions. There are some books that just won't sell, and can I still do something that really feels meaningful to me within the scope of it also being my business?
Yeah. The goal ultimately, I would imagine, is when you like feel better and bring that great intention to something like cooking, and it then transcends outwards.
Yes, exactly. Like, when I'm nourished on all levels, my family feels it. My whole family, it's like a ripple effect, and everyone can feel that effect of me being grounded and nourished and well fed in all the ways.
Yeah. Well, this is wonderful.
It was wonderful to talk to you, and we wish this book wings. Thank you, Nicki.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are some other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch, or just buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thank you to our editor, Abby Circatella, and until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.